The SSD you're thinking about buying in 6 months is going to cost significantly more than it does today. Not because of inflation, not because of supply chain disruption, but because the AI industry is quietly consuming the same raw material your storage drive is made from, at a scale that is about to change the consumer market in a very direct way. This is not a prediction based on guesswork. This is a pattern that has already played out once before, that analysts at IDC, TrendForce, and Goldman Sachs are all tracking right now, and that the major NAND flash manufacturers are already responding to in ways that tell you exactly where prices are heading. By the time this becomes mainstream news, the prices will have already moved. So let's talk about it now, while you still have time to make a smart decision. And I want to be clear about the shape of this video before we go any further. I'm not going to tell you the sky is falling or that SSDs are about to become unaffordable luxury items. What I am going to do is walk you through the specific supply and demand mechanics at play right now, show you the historical parallel that makes this pattern recognizable, and give you a practical framework for what to buy, when to buy it, and how much storage to prioritize, so that whatever happens to prices in the next 12 to 18 months, you're ahead of it rather than reacting to it. To understand why your next storage purchase is going to hurt, you need to understand one thing about how AI actually works at the hardware level, because most people think of AI as software, and that mental model hides the physical reality underneath it. Training a large AI model is not primarily a software problem. It is a storage problem. When a company like Google, Microsoft, Meta, or Amazon trains a next-generation AI model, they are processing datasets of almost incomprehensible scale. We are talking about hundreds of petabytes of text, images, video, and structured data that needs to be stored, accessed, shuffled, and rewritten across thousands of servers simultaneously. The storage medium of choice for that kind of high-speed, high-endurance workload is enterprise-grade NAND flash, the same fundamental material that's in the SSD sitting in your laptop right now, manufactured to tighter tolerances, configured in larger arrays, and consumed at a rate that would have been considered science fiction 5 years ago. Here's the number that puts this in perspective. According to data published by TrendForce, a semiconductor market research firm that tracks NAND flash production and consumption globally, AI-related storage demand grew by over 60% year over year in 2024. Not 6%, not 16%, 60%. And that growth is not plateauing. The build-out of AI data centers globally is accelerating. Microsoft alone announced over $80 billion in planned data center investment for 2025. Google committed to $75 billion. Meta announced $60 billion. Amazon's AWS capital expenditure guidance for 2025 was revised upward to over $100 billion, a significant portion of which is storage and compute infrastructure. Every one of those dollars is competing for the same NAND flash wafers that get sliced into the consumer SSDs on the shelves at your local electronics store. Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, the three companies that collectively manufacture the overwhelming majority of the world's NAND flash, are not running unlimited fabs. A NAND flash fabrication plant costs between $15 and $20 billion to build and takes 3 to 4 years to bring to full production capacity. You cannot spin up new supply overnight in response to a demand surge. What you can do, and what these manufacturers are already doing, is allocate a larger percentage of existing fab output to enterprise customers who pay significantly higher margins than consumer drive manufacturers. When fab allocation shifts toward enterprise, consumer drive manufacturers get less raw NAND, build fewer drives, and raise prices to maintain margin. That is the mechanical sequence already in motion. Security analyst firm Raymond James issued a note to investors in late 2024 specifically flagging NAND flash supply tightening as a consequence of AI infrastructure build-out. They projected consumer SSD prices could rise 20 to 35% within 12 to 18 months from the point of that writing. IDC's storage market forecast echoed a similar directional view, noting that enterprise SSD demand was absorbing a disproportionate share of available NAND production capacity. These are not doom forecasters. These are firms whose entire credibility rests on getting supply chain calls right. Think about what this means for you practically. The 2 TB SSD you've been watching, waiting for it to drop another $10 before you pull the trigger, the price trajectory is likely about to reverse. The upgrade you've been putting off for your desktop or your aging laptop, the window where those drives are at historically low prices is closing. And if you're building a new system in the next year, storage is the component category where buying earlier rather than later is going to save you real money. Here's where the numbers get uncomfortable. Because when you actually sit down and work through the supply and demand math on global NAND flash production versus what the AI build-out requires, the picture that emerges is not a gradual price drift. It's a structural squeeze. Global NAND flash production capacity, measured in exabytes of output per quarter, has been growing steadily, but that growth was calibrated against a demand forecast that predated the current AI infrastructure arms race. The forecasting models that Samsung and Micron were using to plan fab expansion in 2021 and 2022 did not account for a world where every major technology company simultaneously decided to build the largest AI infrastructure in history within a 2 to 3 year window. The demand signal they're receiving now is categorically different from what their capacity planning assumed. There's a direct historical parallel here that makes the pattern unmistakable. In 2017 and 2018, cryptocurrency mining created a sudden, massive, and largely unanticipated surge in demand for DRAM and NAND flash. GPU prices exploded, but SSD and RAM prices followed. Consumer SSD prices rose between 25 and 40% within 18 months of the mining boom beginning, according to pricing data tracked by Storage Review over that period. Then the mining bubble burst, demand collapsed, manufacturers were left with oversupply, and prices crashed. The cycle took roughly 3 years from surge to correction. The AI demand cycle is different in one critical way. It is not speculative. Cryptocurrency mining demand was driven by the price of Bitcoin, volatile, irrational, bubble-shaped. AI infrastructure investment is driven by competitive necessity among the largest and most cash-rich companies on Earth. Microsoft cannot afford to let Google pull ahead on AI capability. Google cannot afford to let Amazon. Amazon cannot afford to let Microsoft. This is not a bubble that pops when sentiment shifts. This is a sustained, multi-year, strategically motivated build-out, which means the supply pressure on NAND flash is not a spike. It is a new baseline, and consumer prices will reflect that new baseline. The manufacturers know this. SK Hynix CEO Kwak Nojung stated publicly in an earnings call that the company was prioritizing high bandwidth memory and enterprise NAND allocation to meet AI customer demand, explicitly at the expense of consumer product mix. That is a CEO telling you, in plain language, that your consumer SSD is a lower priority than their hyperscaler contracts. Micron's investor communications in Q3 2024 made similar directional statements about enterprise mix shift. When the people running the factories tell you where their output is going, believe them. Let me be specific about what's actually coming and what the smartest moves look like right now, because there's a window here and it's not a large one. First, let's talk about what to buy. For most people watching this, the sweet spot for storage investment right now is in the 2 TB to 4 TB range for primary drives. Here's why those specific capacities make sense. Prices per terabyte are currently at or near historical lows in the 2 TB category. The market has been oversupplied since late 2022, and prices have been falling. That oversupply is what's now being absorbed by enterprise demand. The 2 TB tier is where you get the best current value, and where price increases will be most visible first, because it's the highest volume consumer category, and therefore the most directly impacted by fab allocation shifts. For NVMe PCIe Gen 4 drives specifically, which is what you should be buying for any modern system built in the last 3 years, brands like Samsung 9990 Pro, WD Black SN850X, and Crucial T705 are all currently at price points that represent genuine value. I'm not going to give you specific dollar figures because prices move, but check Camel for Amazon pricing history or use PC Part Picker to see historical price trends. If a drive is currently at or near its historical low, that is meaningful context for a buy decision in a market that is about to shift directionally upward. For secondary storage, bulk storage drives where you're keeping media, backups, large files, this is actually a moment where traditional hard drives deserve a second look. HDDs are not subject to the same NAND supply pressure because they use magnetic platters, not flash cells. HDD prices have been falling steadily and are not facing the same demand-side pressure from AI infrastructure. A $40 or $8 HDD as a secondary storage tier alongside a smaller primary NVMe SSD gives you a cost-effective storage architecture that insulates you partially from NAND price increases on your bulk data. If you are planning a full system build or a laptop purchase in the next 12 months, storage is the component category to buy now and buy larger than you think you need. Here is a principle that has held up consistently across every storage price cycle of the last 20 years. People consistently underestimate how much storage they'll use in 3 years. The person who bought a 256 GB SSD in 2019 thinking it was plenty is the person who's been managing storage anxiety ever since. Whatever capacity feels right to you today, buy the next tier up. The price difference between 1 TB and 2 TB right now is small. The price difference in 18 months may not be. On timing, the analyst consensus from TrendForce and IDC places the most significant consumer price movement in the second half of 2025 and into 2026. as enterprise contract cycles renew and manufacturers lock in their allocation commitments for the year. If you are going to make a storage purchase in the next 18 months, earlier is meaningfully better than later. This is not artificial urgency. This is the supply chain math pointing in one clear direction. A note on what this advice doesn't cover. If you're in an enterprise or business procurement context, your purchasing decisions involve volume contracts, warranty tiers, and endurance ratings that go well beyond what I've covered here. The consumer-grade drives I've referenced are not appropriate for business-critical workloads. And if your storage needs are primarily cloud-based, you're working from Google Drive, iCloud, or OneDrive with a small local footprint, the consumer SSD market shift affects you much less directly. Know your actual workflow before making any storage investment. This SSD story is one chapter in something larger that I think is worth naming directly. We are in the middle of the largest infrastructure build-out in the history of consumer technology. The AI arms race between Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, and a growing list of challengers is not happening in some abstract server farm that has nothing to do with your daily life. It is happening in the supply chains that make every piece of technology you buy. NAND flash is the first visible pressure point. DRAM is likely the next. Advanced semiconductor packaging, the specialized chips that make AI inference efficient, the rare, earth materials that go into the hardware. All of these are being consumed at a rate that consumer electronics markets were not designed to absorb simultaneously. The decisions being made in data center procurement meetings at hyperscale companies right now are going to show up in your next laptop purchase, your next desktop build, your next phone upgrade. Not as a dramatic headline, but as a quiet, persistent upward pressure on prices that makes everything incrementally more expensive without an obvious single cause to point to. Understanding the mechanism, NAND supply being allocated away from consumer markets toward enterprise AI infrastructure, means you can make purchasing decisions with your eyes open rather than just absorbing cost increases reactively. You're not powerless in this situation. You just need the information earlier than most people get it. Buy the storage you need now, buy more than you think you need, and watch the NAND flash allocation reports from TrendForce and DRAMex change. They're free to read, and they will tell you what's coming to a Best Buy near you about 6 months before it actually arrives. If this gave you useful context for a purchasing decision you've been sitting on, drop a comment. With what you're running right now and what you're planning to upgrade to, I'm genuinely curious what people are working with. And subscribe, because when the next supply chain shift hits a component category that affects your wallet, I'll have the breakdown ready before the price tags change.